Now, I'm Emma Laffey and I am here with Jim McHugh, Mary, Claire Larkin, Nee McHugh and David McHugh. And they're going to talk about their lovely grandmother who was a midwife, Bridget, Agnes, Deffley, Nee McGowan. And she served her time, Jim, in Castlebar, was it? In Mayo.
In Mayo.
So you want to tell us a little bit about her?
Okay, well, Granny Bridget Agnes Deffley was born in a place called Knockbawn, which is just quite adjacent to Glen Island, which is maybe 7 miles from Castlebar. So they probably lived about 9 miles from Castlebar. And she was born in 1883. And so there was a family of 10, in fact, and a small farm.
Where did she come in the family, Jim?
She came, well, I'm not quite sure of that.
Will she be near the end?
But she was very close to the end.
Yeah.
Unless now Claire or Dave might be able to sort of fill me in on that.
We'll have to look it up.
We'll look it up. That's all right.
No.
But she was near, but she wasn't the eldest or anything.
No. But she eventually met a man called Peter Deffley, who came from, between Strokestown and Elphin in Roscommon. Now I know that they had family in Tensyfield, but I think that her husband came from a place called Kiltruston, which is quite adjacent to Strokestown. But anyway, she met Peter Deffley, who was an RIC man, and they got married. And he was stationed in Aughrim in East Galway. And in Aughrim, they had 3 children. There was 2 girls and a boy. And when my grandfather Peter was 35, he died from pneumonia.
Oh, gee.
I suppose in those days, like there was,
It was huge that time.
Yeah, it was huge. Yeah, leaving Granny with like
very small family. 3
babies nearly.
Yeah.
So anyway, she came back to Castlebar. She had a brother, John Joe McGowan, who had established a business in Castlebar. And I'd say he was kind of
father figure.
He was.
Yeah,
he was.
Yeah.
And I'd say he organised accommodation for her in Castlebar. But here she was, like, I don't know what widow's circumstances were in those days, but I'd say that they weren't.
Oh, they wouldn't be great.
Yeah, they wouldn't. Or whether she had any kind of an RIC pension.
We looked that up, myself and Porrick.
Yeah.
And his notes in the RIC were hard to make out.
Yeah.
And it was like as if something was changed. But it said gratuity paid to widow.
Right.
So, like, what was that?
Was that a once-off payment, gratuity? It sounds like.
Mammy always said that there was no pension.
Yeah.
So gratuity paid to widow.
So she was on her own.
Yeah.
She was, and I'd say this, as you said, the father figure, John Joe, looked after her, and
would that have pushed her then to do the midwifery, Jim, do you think? To go and get educated?
Sorry, would you say that again?
Would you think that pushed her to do the midwifery then?
Well, I'd say she had to make a living, and I don't know. All I know is that her husband died in 1910, and she didn't qualify as a midwife until 1920.
Yeah.
So in the meantime, I presume, I don't know how she made a living.
No.
Do you know?
We don't know.
She could have.
She
probably did get educated, all right, but it wasn't until it was made legal.
Oh, so maybe she was working.
She was working as a midwife.
Yes,
I would say.
Yeah.
And then you see the Midwives Act came in 1918, where they had to have their qualifications on paper.
That's right. In fact, we have her certificate here, qualified in 1920.
Yeah, so I would say she was trained.
Right.
Whatever training was at that time.
Right.
And came back and worked as a midwife. But because the 1918 Midwifery Act came in, if you didn't have your papers, you couldn't work as a midwife.
Right.
So she would have went and done that then.
That wasn't farmed out to people like Foster, but
they were.
That must mean she was working.
Well, and I thought like that Mammy was younger when that happened, but so then I was surprised that she was 10. But that would explain why she remembered it so clearly.
Yeah, so
they had a good experience.
My mother and my aunt and my uncle were, if you like, fostered out to friends.
Yeah.
While Granny, it was a 6 months course, I understand, full-time 6 months course. And she went off and did that. And then she came back and she set up her business in Lower Chapel Street, Castlebar.
Is the house still there, Jim?
The house is still there, and it was recently reconstructed because
just need
it was sold after Granny died, you know, and like I suppose there was no question of keeping a second house in those days, you know, back in 1961 when Granny died, you know. But she worked. I mean, I remember her working well on her. Granny has gone on a case. That was, where's Granny? Yes. Granny has gone on a case.
That was the statement.
Yeah. And you see, in the 1920s, the family came back to her, and I mean, I don't know what happened if there was well, of course there were. If Mam was 10, you know, they were old enough. Like if Granny had to go on a case in the middle of the night, because
that time they're old enough, and neighbours would have popped in to see they're all right, or
and then you see her brother lived just across, maybe 100 yards, or less away. Fine. So, and I'd say he had family, and like they popped in and saw her, and
they all looked after
so I'd say, it was a question of looking after her.
She had to work.
That's right. Choice. She had to work. Yeah. So she went to work on. She had what we called a high and Ellie bike. You know the ones.
Yes.
And there was a carrier on it, and the carrier, she had a black case. And it just fitted on the carrier, whether the carrier was made for it or not. And she had a belt round it, like, and she kept on.
So the case, would it have been like a square suitcase, or was it more like the old doctor case?
It was like I'd say a doctor case.
Yes, I know the one they open at the top.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. It opened like that. Yeah, it was maybe that size opened up, and so Granny kept all her accoutrements, as we called it, in that. Now she travelled. She had a carbide lamp for the bike when she was travelling at night, because sometimes a farmer would come in, say from out the country, and his wife was in labour, and Granny would have to go out on her bike. Now, sometimes the doctor might be going and the doctor might bring her, or if the doctor was busy elsewhere, or if
the farmer might himself with horse and cart.
Sometimes it'd be maybe a pony and trap, you know, and then she could get ferried in and out on the pony.
Do you know what kind of would have been like a 10-mile radius, maybe?
Oh, well, wait till I see now.
So she would have served a big enough area of the town.
Probably wouldn't have been that far away now, you know.
5.
But again, we wouldn't be sure. I mean, say Bellavary would be 7 miles out now, whether she went that far or not.
Not that we ever heard of.
Yeah.
Because she would have had a big town here anyway at the time.
Oh,
Castlebar,
yeah.
So it would have been serving a huge area.
There were a few other midwives in town as well, too. But I'd say that in my memory, Granny seems to have been the most active, you know, because maybe the others were a bit older than her, I don't know.
Yeah.
But anyway, Granny certainly was very active. And she certainly would have had a bit, because I often met people down through the years that say, oh, sure, your granny brought me into the world. You know, that was kind of a regular set. So she obviously had a big, we call them clientele, or number of patients. That's right. She was.
Myself and Pádraig were back in Westport one day, and I can still picture the girl. She was standing at the door of a pub, and she said, oh, your grandmother delivered all of us. Come in until I buy you a drink. Pádraig got such a kick out of it. We didn't. But
did she work right up until maybe the 40s, 50s?
Well, I'll tell you something. She was still working in the 70s. She died. Sorry, not in the 70s. 60s. In the 50s. She died in 61 in November.
So right up near her death.
Yeah,
54 I was born.
Yeah, I remember well. There was one case round about this time of the year, and it was, say, 2 miles from Granny's house out the country, and she wasn't able to cycle because there was snow on the ground. So anyway, I was dispatched with Granny to walk with her and carry her bag on a Sunday afternoon. I remember that well. So I was probably 15 or 16 at the time, and that would have been around 1955, 1956 maybe, but certainly 55. So I walked with Granny down to the house, and I was put in the front room and given copious amounts of lemonade and biscuits. I had a great time.
As you do.
Granny did her business, and then I walked her back in home again.
Can you remember, Jim, what her uniform was?
Well, she would have worn, I'd say, ordinary clothes in those days.
Yeah. Did she have a certain coat or?
No, I don't think.
Apron?
No, well, she had aprons,
Yeah.
all right. Yeah,
Yeah.
she had. But I mean, I don't remember it as a nurse's uniform.
Yeah.
Do you know?
In the 50s, yeah.
That's
You were-
right. Yeah.
But she definitely had her penny, as they used to call it. That
Yeah,
time.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Penny
Yeah.
with her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you see,
That's
we
right.
wouldn't have seen, or you wouldn't have seen her in.
No,
In-
you see.
at Agnes.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
so she'd be in the back.
Yeah, I was never apprenticed to the job.
Yeah.
You know, if I had, I would have known what was going on, you know. But she, I mean, she was, you had to be dedicated because, I mean, if somebody knocked at your door at 4 a.m.,
You had
you
to
had to
go.
get up and go.
And
I
what
mean,
kind of personality was she? Was she a strong character?
well, she was very, very gentle, wasn't she?
Ah.
But I mean, obviously, she must have had a strong personality because, I mean, to rear her 3 children,
Yeah.
you know, and then help to rear some of her grandchildren as well, because
And educate herself.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I mean, we lived in the line of houses. We lived in number 7, and Granny lived in number 22, and of course, she went to the church every evening, and she knelt in the same place in the church, and she had her prayers to say, and she had a book called, I think it was a Blue Rosary, was the book called, and she had prayers. But she'd come into our house every day coming back from the church, you know, and then she'd walk down home. And I remember in 1947, they were telling me the story of we had a bad blizzard. I mean, a really bad blizzard. And I remember when I was going to school, the schools were closed for about 3 weeks. Sure, we had a ball, you know. Yeah. But my father was telling me, when he was going down to Granny's house, he had to walk with his arm along the wall
Wow.
because otherwise you could wander in the blizzard.
That was the only way he'd know where he
Yeah,
was
and it was
going.
along the one path, like, you know. But the blizzard was that bad. Yeah, and then for weeks afterwards, like there was no insulation in the houses, and every so often there'd be a big slide off the roof down, so there were
Snow would
huge
fall.
big piles of snow like on the ground. But I mean, that was in 47. I mean, I wouldn't have been aware whether Granny had any cases in those days or not. Now, sometimes there was a GP, Dr. Moran, who was also the physician in the hospital. So he had his own practice, but he was also the county, I suppose,
Obstetrician as
consultant
well in there.
nowadays.
Yeah.
You know. And I think in those days in the hospital there was the general medicine man, come obstetrician, and there was a surgeon, and there was an anaesthetist, and I'd say that was the extent of the consultants like in the hospital in those days. So I mean, Granny was working a lot of the time, and as I say, sometimes the doctor might take her with him, but I mean, mostly she hit off on her bike and out and did her cases, and then I can't remember. I mean, I went off to college in 57, and she certainly wasn't working in those days, you know, and then she died quite quickly in 1961. And,
But you were saying she has memories of maybe times during the Troubles that you know, the guards and all that would have been out, and she would have met one or two.
Oh well, there was one famous story. Granny was on a case one day out the Ballinrobe Road, and Ballyhane or wherever, or Belcarra area. Anyway, she was, as I said, she had a carbide lamp, and she was coming in one night, and there's a railway bridge just on the edge of Castlebar, and as she was coming over the railway bridge, she was stopped by a guard who said, you know, asked the various questions like, who are you, where are you going, that sort of thing, anyway, and what are you doing out at this time of the night? So he said, you know, who are you? I'm Mrs. Deffley. And where are you going? I'm going home. Where do you live? I live in Castlebar. And where are you coming from? I was out in Ballyhane, let's say. And why were you out in Ballyhane this hour of the night? Well, she said, you're not married, are you? And he said, what makes you ask that? And she said, well, if you were married, you'd know who Mrs. Deffley was. So the poor innocent, anyway, when he was on duty in the barracks later on, maybe that day, he said to the lads, he started inquiring, could anybody tell me, I'm looking for information about a Mrs. Bridget Deffley. And what do you want, Mrs. Deffley, for? So he got an
They were
awful...
ribbing him then.
He got an awful slag in a bachelor looking for Mrs. Deffley, you know. But that story was obviously told out of the barracks, like, afterwards, you
And
know.
was she a bit of a character now? And a support, I suppose, to your mother growing up?
Huge
Oh, big
support.
time.
Growing up, yeah.
Now Joan, who isn't here and who sent the missive, she always says that she was the kindest woman she ever met, and Joan spent a lot of time with her. And Joan would have been what when she died? Was she 10 or 11?
Well, I was 10. I was living
Oh
with
God,
her up
she
to
was
the time
more.
she died.
Oh yeah, sure. I was
Yeah.
7. You were 10.
Yeah, Joan was
Joan
probably
was
14.
Yeah.
We used to take her turns then, you see,
Yeah.
because she was there on her own. So, and it suited as well. We had a big family, so she had a spare bedroom, so some of us used to stay there. And
It was the time out from the big family too, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, I
Get
mean,
spoiled by Granny.
Well,
Yeah.
we
yeah.
lived up the street
spent-
until we sort of went up market in
You
what,
were 5 then.
56.
56.
And we moved to the other end of town. And apparently the story was I couldn't hack the other end of town. Like, it was like being in a foreign country. So I used to go back and spend a lot of time with Granny.
Yeah, and if Dave was missing, he was down.
They knew where to find you if you were missing.
And no one could actually pinpoint where I was.
You remember her well, David. So
I remember her very well, but I remember her telling me one story about being out on a case, and it was when I don't remember the exact location, but it was sort of the Pontoon Ballabari direction, and someone was with her, and she said I think when were the Black and Tans in action?
Well,
1920s.
Yeah,
She
yeah.
said she said the Black and Tans were out and their bullets were flying overhead. And they still kept going to the case and back, you know.
They could hear it all going on
Or
around
they could
them.
hear it, like, said, yeah, you could.
It must have been
the
awful
bullets
scary
flying.
too.
Oh, shocking. And then only recently I heard the story about when the Free Staters came to Castlebar, and like the granny, Mammy always said, families were either pro-Dev or pro
There's a big divide.
Collins. She always blamed Dev for the Civil War, so didn't like him at all. And when the Free State came to Castlebar and she met them, she told them they were very welcome. So she was quite open about her politics. Yeah, and brothers fighting with brothers,
Yeah.
that would have broken their hearts.
She would have seen all that.
Yeah.
And they shot
So
Michael
Joan
Collins on
actually
his way
sent
to
me.
Mass
Joan
with the
couldn't
Bible
come today.
on
So
his arm.
there's an email that Joan sent me.
Okay.
She, said Granny meant so many things to me, but all my memories are of a very warm, loving person, never ruffled, with a lovely demeanour. That's where I got it from. Traits which her daughter Josephine, our beloved mother, inherited. Because I was 13 when she died, stories of her nursing career would have been inherited from older family members who knew her when she worked as a midwife, known as Nurse Deffley, as she went to attend to her cases. Now, we've talked about that, as she called them. However, there is one I distinctly remember hearing, and it's the one where she was cycling home from a call in the pitch black of night when she saw something white moving in the same direction in the field beside her. Terrified, she moved quickly, as did the shape, but eventually Granny got ahead. However, she decided to go back to investigate what was happening because she realised that if she didn't check it out, she'd never have the courage to go out again at night. Turned out it was a black cow with a white head who was equally as curious as the lady on the bike. And I remember telling
That's
that
lovely.
story herself.
Because it would have been full of banshee stories and everything that time.
Yeah, you hear stories like
Yeah,
that,
Yeah.
And to have the strength to go back and check it out.
Yeah.
I
And she
love
said,
that.
Granny attended Mammy when she was given birth, and I do remember the day Claire was born. Joan said I was 6. But the main reason I remember is that we were allowed play outside all day and were fed by a lovely German neighbour, Doris O'Callaghan, who lived down just the line, which was a real treat. I also remember that Dr. Matt Moran, he's the man who was the consultant, was in the house. And years later, Mammy told us that Claire was breech. And the fear was that she wouldn't survive. Of course, she
You're here to
survived
tell the
very
tale.
much. Yeah. But Granny
Fluffy.
was kind of prepared. Granny said, Joe, to my mother, you already have 7 beautiful, healthy children,
You might have
which
to
helped
let this
prepare her
one
for the
go.
worst should it happen. Yeah.
Yeah. You see, they saw such hardships.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's it.
All that, yeah.
Thankfully, she did survive, and Granny often said she could be the best. She could be the best feather in your wing, which she proved to be.
Oh, isn't that lovely?
My mother told
Your
me
granny-
that so often.
That's our Claire.
Isn't that a lovely thing your granny said about you?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Except that she spoiled my birthday.
Oh,
Yes.
you robbed his
We
day.
were born on the same day.
Oh,
Yes.
you pinched his day then.
It took him years to forgive me.
And
Mad
they had two
shit.
children on the same day as well. Each of them, Ailish
Yeah.
That's right,
and
yeah.
Owen, were
Yeah.
born on the same day as well.
Isn't it lovely your granny
Yeah.
delivered you?
Best.
I
For
think
your
that's just
own
lovely.
daughter,
And
like.
how safe your mother would have felt.
Absolutely.
You know.
Absolutely.
And that's why you survived, I think.
Yeah.
Because if that had been someone you weren't sure of
Yeah.
or you didn't trust,
Yeah.
the mum would have been all anxious.
Yeah.
She
But
had
she
full
probably-
trust in our mother.
But it's great to do it.
She was,
Amazing.
Super.
Are there a lot of stories of that? You know, mothers delivering for their own daughters.
There is with the midwife, this era of midwifery.
Right.
There
Yeah,
is.
it's
If they married, some of them didn't marry. If
Yeah.
they married, yes, there is stories.
Yeah.
But it's lovely to have a little sentence that she's the extra
Unbelievable.
feather in the wing. It's lovely.
That's feather in
That's
your
really
wing,
lovely.
Joe. And then for my mother to be telling me that,
Yeah.
because that was so affirming for me, like,
Yeah.
oh God, of course, like.
So
But
how
that was
many
actually
grandchildren did she have?
She had, well, Mammy had 8, and then Uncle Jimmy had 4.
Yeah.
Wasn't it? Yeah,
And
And
Auntie
then-
Baby had 3.
had 3. And Auntie Baby died similar to Granny being widowed. Baby died when her youngest of 3 was 3. She's still alive now. I have actually a
That's
text
right.
from her.
Billy,
And and that uncle-in-law reared those 3 children himself.
So that was in 1945. In
Yeah.
fact, in 1945, my aunt, who was married to a guard, in fact, and they were down in Tralee, and she, sometime maybe the previous year, they noticed she had a black spot on her cheek anyway. And they brought her to the doctor. And I remember well the story was that the doctor said he'd have to do some research and he'd get back. So of course it was melanoma. And so Granny stayed then, our baby, our aunt, stayed with Granny until she died. And she died down in number 22. And Mother was after giving birth to, in 1945, to Maureen, her sister. And so Mother was in bed just after, and when her sister's funeral passed.
Imagine that.
Oh, bless her.
It was
Yeah.
shocking.
And then Uncle Tim, who was my uncle-in-law, he lived in Tralee, and so he had 3 children, and they stayed here for a while until he went back to Tralee and got established. He had to get a housekeeper. And they had a house, all right. He had to get a housekeeper and organise, I suppose, schools and everything. And he was a marvellous man. Like, I mean,
But the story was when this had all happened, baby had died, the next thing, Uncle Tim, we always called him, started gathering up the children's clothes and stuff. And Granny and my mother looked at each other and looked at him and said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I'm bringing them." They assumed he'd leave them in Castlebar to be reared by their granny and mum.
Yeah.
But no, and it was so unusual.
Well,
then.
it wasn't unusual.
Oh,
because
so
the men tended to get the children taken off them, you see.
Yeah, they did.
But
I'm
he was
sure you saw
determined.
lots of
well,
that.
he was great, and seemingly he was a marvellous man. Like, he was a native of Abbeyfield, and he had been stationed. Now he must have met our aunt. He had been stationed down in Rossport, which is way over in West Mayo. And so I presume that, he must have met our aunt like sometime that he was in Castlebar. But anyway, he was stationed. But
Dance or
seemingly
something.
Yeah,
they were the guards were extraordinarily good to him.
yeah.
He was made the chief's driver, which means that he had regular hours. The chief used to give him his car at Christmas and Easter and summer to come up on holidays to Castlebar.
Isn't that
We
lovely?
brought them back all the time.
Yeah.
You don't know
to
the
route.
chief's name? No. won't come to you, doesn't matter.
Jeepers,
Just I said,
You
I'd
think
ask
of
what
it.
it'll think it'll come to you. It'll come to you.
yeah.
But it's lovely. Well, it wouldn't be hard to find out at that time anyway.
But the
records.
chief, I know, had an orchard, and Uncle Tim used to look after it.
no.
But he baked,
He baked.
and he sewed,
He did their hair.
had his own
Mum said.
vegetables, and everything.
Yeah.
And the story was that, I remember hearing the story that, they were all wandering down in Tralee, would he get married again? And some of the lads were kind of trying to fix him up, as to say. But no, he was a
never
one-woman man. And he
Concentrate on his children.
He did,
Oh,
absolutely.
big time.
And
big time.
he actually
Very
never
time.
suffered. Like, he got a bit stiffer in the olden days, and he worked for a while when he retired in the fisheries out on the bay in Tralee Bay, kind of patrolling, you know what I mean. Then he retired anyway, and one morning he got up and he sat down in the chair, had a cigarette. Lily gave him a cup of tea, and he just died. Just like that, but that was Uncle Tim. But like, it was marvellous the way they
Going
were.
back to
Sorry,
Granny.
Emma.
No, you're all right. Just going back to Granny, in her later years. So she lived them out in number 22, as you said.
Yeah.
So for her passing, maybe, and her funeral, can you remember anything about any of that now?
Well, I
in her
remember.
last years?
Well, I'll tell you one thing I do remember. This woman had a few sons in Redemptorists, and they had been in the Philippines, and they had been in Brazil, and one of them, because he had been in Brazil, was fluent in Spanish, and he was brought up to Texas at some stage to deal with the migrants up there. But anyway, one of the days that Granny was in hospital, I happened to be up in the ward, and the next thing, Father Jim walked into the ward unannounced. Just home on holidays. Called down to see and Bridget, as he called her, and it was like miraculous, if you like. And I mean, that was so happy for her.
Yeah.
Do you know?
And the big travelling that time in the
Yeah.
60s.
That's right. Now, he happened to be home on holidays, and just maybe heard Aunt Bridget was saying that there were very few telephones around.
Probably lit
those
up
days,
when she seen him.
And he just arrived in, So that was him.
Was it old age she passed away from?
Well, no. Seemingly, she must have had some sort of, I remember them telling me, mother noticed that her colour was a bit yellowish.
The yellow jaundice, I was told she had.
So the liver was at her.
So she died in about 3 weeks.
Oh, that was quick.
Had never been in hospital like in my time until that, and I suppose mother probably knew that, when she talked to the doctors and that, But sorry, just another bit about Joan says, she used to get the Woman's Weekly. It was a magazine in those days, and she loved. It said she loved reading the Woman's Weekly. Every Saturday morning, one of us was dispatched to Wynn's newsagents to collect it. A very popular task because there was always a few pence for the runner.
And my only memory, imagine now when I was 7, I remember her going to her apron, as you mentioned, her pinny, the flowery ones, hanging up. I don't know, was there maybe a cupboard inside
in
the
the
door?
cupboard, sort of like a wardrobe
Yeah.
cupboard,
And going to that and giving me a threepenny bit.
Oh,
That was a pile of money at that stage. Now.
you were loaded.
Yeah. Threepenny
But she
bit.
was obviously getting a pension that time.
Yeah,
she
she
would
must
say to
have.
me, "I'll give you always on pension day.
Uh,
you get
A little treat.
a few bob to go up to Tommy Lawless and buy a nice
And do you
thing.
remember any characters coming into the house? Was it an open kind of house with people always coming in and out? Or?
Well, the neighbours, you see, in those
Yeah.
days, you'd always have neighbours. There was a Mrs. Ryan lived next door, and she would have been very friendly with them. And Aunt Nora, this lady here now who married the Scott man, she used to come down every year at least for a few days for holidays, And then Uncle Jimmy, my uncle, who was a teacher out in Glen Island, he used to come in. He cycled in from Glen Island every Saturday to do the shopping for themselves. He'd go home with 2 big bags, and I often remember him as well too. Every so often he'd have a battery, because the batteries for the radios, you had to bring them in to Dermot Fahey's to get them recharged.
Yeah.
It was a wet battery, I think.
Yeah.
It was a big thing, like maybe about that size, by that. And you'd have 2 batteries. You'd leave one in to the electrician,
yes.
and it'd be charged the next time.
have
But
the
he'd
other
have
one there.
that, and then he'd go down. Johnny McHale's was 3 doors down. It was a well-known pub. Uncle Jimmy would go down for a glass of stout, and that's what they used to drink in those days. And then Granny had said to one of us was there, "Go down, tell Uncle Jimmy the dinner's ready." Yeah. And he used to also come in on Saturday and Wednesday to go banking, because the bank wasn't open on Saturday. And he used to cut turf on the bog, and he always brought her in loads of turf, like enough turf to keep her going for the winter,
Yeah.
But
She had hens out the back, didn't she? She had hens out the back.
she kept hens all the time. Yeah.
Eggs.
So we had our
Yeah.
own fresh eggs.
Yeah.
One of the treats on Easter Sunday morning was you got 2 boiled eggs.
Mad.
Yeah.
And I'll just read the one Lily sent.
Yeah.
So she's the youngest now of that family who were orphaned, who lost their mother, and she's nearly 80 now, and she still says, "I'll be home. I'm hoping to be home in the summer."
Ah.
It's
Home for her was here.
Yeah,
And her
Castlebar.
own kids say to her, like, "Ma'am, what are you saying? Like, she's been in
But that's
Chile
what she
all
felt at
her
home
life."
with her grandmother on holidays.
Yeah.
So you better read now what she says.
She said, "I remember Granny getting up in the middle of the night to deliver babies. I used to sleep in the bed with her. Then on a Saturday, we would go uptown," imagine like it's the middle of the town, "and she would point out to me the babies she delivered. So proud she was. She had a black delivery bag she took on her deliveries of babies."
Oh, isn't that lovely?
Yeah.
So many memories.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's good. By the way, Joan says here as well, and I remember this. She used to keep her hair tied in a bun, but when she get up in the morning, you see, her hair was very long, and she'd be sitting down there and she'd be brushing the hair out straight. Then she had this way of tying it up in a perfect bun, and then of course when she'd be going to the church, she'd wear a hat with hat pin. Is that what you call it?
She also had a hairnet.
Shove it through the
that
hair.
would hold the bun up.
That's
Yeah.
right.
The hairnet.
That's right. Yeah.
And Joan said, "I never remember her going to a hairdresser. Never."
You never what?
She said she never remembers her going to a hairdresser. So she just
No,
let the
that's
hair
right.
grow.
Yeah, maybe mother used to. I don't know. You know,
Yeah.
it said she always had crisp white bed linen with the valances. Is that right? And pillowcases trimmed with hand crocheted lace. Now, Joan says, while she was in hospital where she died, I had made up her bed waiting for her return. Of course, she didn't return. Since then, I would never change a bed, nor let anyone change a bed for someone due home from hospital. Even when I came home with my own babies, she said, strange how events can leave such lasting impressions.
Yeah.
And of course, that's another thing. When she came to visit our house, which was the other end of the town, it's a fine walk, she would collect washing from our house, bring it down, and bring it back up the following time. And we always had tablecloths, sheets, pillow slips. She obviously had a thing about that. Always sparkling white and ironed. And
Would she have done
dusty
anything like
drawers.
that just out of curiosity? Because I know some houses that would be very close to the church would have done a lot of that and had the vestments and stuff ready
No,
for
but
the
your
priest.
women weren't allowed near the church.
No, but they
to
would have
do
washed
that.
them. They would have washed them. They would have washed the linen for the priest.
All right.
The cloths.
So that was the priests using the women like when it suited them.
Well, the other thing, of course, was that the first Wednesday and Sunday were the christenings. So the first Wednesday or Sunday after each of us was born, Granny brought us to the church and we were baptised. Mammy wasn't at any of the baptisms.
That seems to be a regular thing
Yeah.
because the women were on bed rest.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
right.
So-
And then they had to be churched.
Yes.
Wasn't there some sort of
Yeah.
a
Well,
thing?
3 days, like if you were born on a Tuesday, you'd be baptised the following day because Granny was really religious.
But I
obviously.
remember because John, my brother, like who's 11 years younger than I am, so I was 11 when he was born, and it was decided that I'd be his godfather. So anyway, we carried John back. The church was only back about 200 yards, from our house. Carried John, and anyway, the baptism was taking place, and the priest said to Granny, "What age is this book?" And Granny said, "It's all right, Father. He's been confirmed."
Really?
So I'm still his godfather.
She's well able.
Well, she was. Yeah.
I'm very religious,
Yeah.
very.
Oh,
holy.
very. Yeah, she
Yeah.
was. Yeah,
Mass,
she. You know.
most more. I think every morning.
Did
Well, you see, I suppose with the hardships she had,
Yeah.
her faith is what really
That's right.
carried her through.
That's right.
Possibly,
Yeah.
And she
And
had
I
the
do think
sister.
today's society is missing a lot of that.
Oh.
Not that I'd be overly religious
I
myself,
know.
but just that faith in something.
Oh yeah.
You know, that you can put the
Yeah.
whole time into it and help you get through.
Yeah, I don't
things.
ever remember, go back to your question, I don't ever remember being doing any work like that. I don't know
No.
how it was done for the church.
Well,
They-
she had enough to do for 8 of us. I'd
Oh,
say.
look, I know she had,
probably thought
but I
there's
don't-
plenty can do that.
I don't remember. Maybe you see in a fairly big parish, maybe they had a laundry system or something.
They would have had something,
You know,
yeah. The
yeah.
town was big enough. But just
Yeah.
sometimes, if the house was across the way, sometimes
Yeah.
it-
Yeah, and of course you see the priests, like there were maybe 6 priests, 5 in the presbytery and 1 in the priest's house, and each of them had housekeepers, so maybe they used to do that sort of
yeah,
work.
well, that's how that happened.
You know,
yeah.
I'd say that's probably what happened, you know.
But she was a very proud woman, was she?
Very proud,
She was,
obviously.
yeah.
Lily
Yeah.
says it there, and delighted with how things had worked out, I suppose.
Going back to
Dave,
Granny,
you- yeah.
our mother, her daughter, worked outside the home and had 8 of us, which
Yeah.
was like revolutionary at that time.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
now she had a good arrangement with her boss that she needed time. She took the time,
Yeah.
but Granny did a lot of
Yeah.
the mothering as well.
That's
Yeah.
right.
You know,
She
to
was-
enable
To assist her.
mum to,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
Yeah, mother worked for, she was a law clerk in the office of Micheál O'Moran, who became a famous politician afterwards, was minister and that,
Well,
you know.
it's funny you say that now. So Mrs. Minch delivered him.
Did she?
Yes.
Right.
Himself, Mr. Linehan, and Mr. Charlie Haughey.
Oh,
Well,
oh yeah.
I have to say,
because-
there's a debate
So it's
about...
amazing how the connection.
Yeah, because, when mother actually, or mother died in 92, in 92.
Yeah.
And she, for the last number of years of her life, she had her own hours in the office. If she went in for an hour or two, and seemingly she was doing some designated thing. But so she still worked, even though it was now the office of Pat Moran, who was Micheál O'Moran's nephew. And so she worked there in October, and she died in December.
Yeah.
Oh,
You know,
Yeah.
So she had been an employee of Micheál O'Moran's for 58 years.
But you remember
Word.
when
Yeah.
the talk came out about how he'd been born in Castlebar,
Yeah,
and Mum got a phone call to say, apparently he was born in Castlebar. Would your mother have had anything to do with that? But she said Mammy wasn't a lover of Haughey, and so she took the nose off them and said something like, well, I know what it was, even if she did, sure, the Haughey's I wouldn't know, the Haughey's weren't important people. It's not as if people would remember that they delivered this child because he was going to be such an important person.
Yeah, I
so
remember
they
that.
were left
they
in
were
no
just
doubt.
a normal average person in the
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
at
and so
the-
we wouldn't know.
There's only later years he became famous in his
Yeah.
own right.
At the time,
Yeah.
in those days, the Irish Times were doing an investigation to try and find out like which midwife did sort of
Yes.
deliver Charlie. You know,
Yes.
But,
So Mammy didn't enlighten them anyway.
Isn't it amazing they're still all intermingled though?
Yeah.
It's all still there.
And would you have found out that Mrs. Minch did
She did deliver.
she did attend,
And
to
I was
the
talking to
Haughey's.
her now granddaughter, who's in her
Right.
80s.
Really?
She confirmed it. She's now
really?
living in Moat, and it's written in Charlie's biography.
Alright.
Really?
Yeah.
You can see none of us have
that
read
girl
it.
now. That girl living in
We did
Moat.
read The Boss. That
That girl living in Moat. Do you know what her name is?
Is it McGowan as well, I think?
No, Martin. Like Mrs. Minch.
There was a Martin in it. Hold on,
Yeah,
I'll tell you.
Mrs. Minch's daughter got married to a man called James Martin.
And she's Pauline McGowan now.
Oh
She
yeah,
married a
Pauline. I
McGowan.
remember Pauline. Yeah, she was one of the girls.
yes.
Yeah, Pauline.
Right.
Yeah, there was Pauline and Monica, and I went to school with Micheál Martin and Benny and Shamey. I remember all they were all friends of ours.
Who's still
Benny,
here?
Benny
Right.
would have been
A
Mr. Minch's
grandson.
grandson.
Yes,
Yeah.
she was Pauline Martin and married Neil McGowan.
That's right.
So
Yeah,
there you go.
yeah,
Isn't it amazing?
yeah,
You do remember
Yeah.
Mrs. Faulkner with a midwife?
yeah.
Do you?
I don't. No.
Because I told you I met Angela Denning, and we were just briefly discussing the heritage, and I said,
Yeah.
that we were actually meeting
Right.
for having been a midwife, and she said, "Oh yeah," she said, "very respected woman." There was also Mrs. Faulkner.
Right.
Now, was that Faulkner's down at?
What we
The
call the
bridge.
Grove.
Yeah.
I doubt it. But maybe she was a relation of theirs, because I think the Faulkner woman who lived in the Grove, I don't think was married. I think maybe she lived there with the brother, but I'm not quite sure.
It might have been a midwife.
But I don't. Well, of course, that's true.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah,
remember. I don't remember Mrs. Faulkner. I just remember there was Nurse Burden and Mrs. Minch and Granny. And I don't know, were there any midwives working in the hospital as such in those days?
They all started coming in whenever the hospital were built, 40s and 50s.
Was that it?
There were midwives then.
Yeah, so it was kind of between the two. You had a choice that time.
Right.
I hope we're not going on for too long, are we?
Oh, not at all. I'm
Okay,
loving
that's
it.
all right. That's all right. No. But like that was it. I mean, people were hard working in those days. As I say, like Granny at 70 plus. I mean, she was 78 when she died, so she must have been 72 or 73 the time I walked her out the 2 miles down to Windsor,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
She was
within
still
a mile.
trusted.
Still working.
And
yeah,
trusted.
You know, yeah. I suppose, you see, you're working all your life too, you know, it becomes ingrained, like, do you know?
And it's such an important, part of families' lives. Like,
It is,
to
of course.
have delivered babies safely.
She never mentioned who helped her deliver her babies. By any chance? No.
No, we wouldn't know anything about
No.
that. In Akron.
No.
Yeah, because
No.
you'd have probably
I wouldn't have an
some
idea now.
of who
Wouldn't
was.
have an idea.
He was in the barracks, presumably, so whether they had
In
somebody
Akron.
in particular. Yeah, that's where he was based. Whether there was
Yeah,
one who attended to them, who
They
knows.
actually lived in the barracks.
No, I don't
they
know, but I
lived in
mean,
the
he
barracks.
was based in the barracks.
I know that, yeah.
Yeah.
But very often the guards had accommodation.
Would they have had there
In the
now?
Oh, yeah, they
Yeah.
would have
Would
had, yeah.
For a family and all.
Generally, they would have had nearly, if there was only the one of them around, they would have had the barracks and their family in
Yeah.
it.
Oh, yeah.
Or there could have been a small building attached that they
Yeah.
would
Yeah,
have
because I remember in the barracks here in Castlebar and the
Yeah.
Garda station, there were
Yeah.
lodgings
there were
with it.
there were homes especially for the
Yeah.
guards. And in fact, as you come out from Castlebar to here, you know the flat roofed houses this side of the boys' school, they were built for the guards.
Oh.
Yeah, Tom McHugh built
that rings
yeah,
a
5 or
bell
6
now.
houses there, all the same style. They were for the guards, and then the guards would, I don't know, but I think they got the chance to buy them then when they retired, because the state wasn't keeping houses for
yeah.
people. It was the same. That Paddy Bresnan, the surgeon, had a health board house, and then when he retired, we understand he bought the house. The state were selling them off then at that stage.
Is there a photo of this RIC man anywhere? That you know
there
of?
is probably in here.
There is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other thing, so I was just thinking you'd be able to find out for us who would have delivered Mam and her 2 siblings.
I might be able to find her birth register and it might have it on it. You might be lucky enough.
Because, of course, they didn't keep... Did any of them?
No, they didn't really keep
Write
records
down
that.
anything.
No. You might be lucky that there might be a familiar name that registered them on the birth register, you know, and you'd know then that was her. But generally the men went in because I think they were paid, as far as I can remember, they paid a penny to register a birth.
Really?
So when the men went in then on Mart Day or whatever
Yeah.
day they went in,
Yeah.
that's why you'd often hear people have 2 birthdays. Because the man would be told it was the 2nd of August,
Oh,
whatever,
yeah.
and he'd go in and put the 2nd of September down.
That's
You
right,
know,
because sometimes
he
it
wouldn't
could be-
remember.
It could be
Yeah.
a long time afterwards before
Yeah.
the register.
Quick, 3 or 4 months,
Yeah.
and they'd go in down on the Mart Day and they'd get the penny then and register them. So my nan was one of them. Her birthday was August, but on her birth
Cert.
it's September.
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose now we have instant sort of registrations and everything, you know, and they're, yeah, change times. But they were hard times. And of course, in those days, like, I mean, Granny lived in a house with no running water, no flush toilets, outdoor, you know.
No, isn't that him, Jim? That's him, isn't it?
So,
Yeah.
Granny's husband, is it?
Yeah.
Peter Deffley.
Yeah.
We used to be sent to the pump to bring back a bucket of water. And there was a pump, you know, the pumps were placed around town by the council from the water scheme. And there was a pump 10 yards from our door, like, we'd be sent with a white bucket, you know.
Yeah.
And interesting as well, you talk about sort of Granny changing the bedclothes and that. Annually, she washed out her blankets. And she had this huge big tub. And there was, what do you call it? Some of the musical groups used to have them. Washboards.
Yeah.
Do you remember?
Yeah, I remember them. Yeah.
And this big bar of Sunlight soap, and there was a slot, and they're rubbing. And then we'd be, get off your shoes, your bare feet, walk into the tub, keep pounding the blankets.
To get them clean.
And then when they were done, get them out, and you'd help Granny wringing the blankets. Like
You were the washing machine.
Yeah, and you'd hang it up on the line then and hope for fine weather, like.
Yeah.
You know, no.
But they were
fridge.
scrupulously clean.
Oh, absolutely.
You know,
absolutely.
No matter what they had, they minded it.
That's right.
Yeah.
No fridge.
No.
In the back of the house where the sun never really got to, there was this box up on the wall with a kind of a mesh front, the way the flies couldn't get in, and that's where the milk was kept, and that's where the butter was kept as well too.
And what size of a house was it, Jim? Was it like a 2-room?
It was. You walk into one room. There was another room ahead of a bedroom, and then on the left hand side there were 2 rooms. And then there was a hall going out the back door. You know, so it's just a small house now.
Little cottage, wasn't
That's
it?
right.
Upstairs, it was just a small cottage.
It was terraced,
What-
you know.
Yeah,
In
and
fact,
would have been
story.
thatched at one time.
No,
Not in
No,
our time,
not in your time.
no.
In fact, that was known as the New Line, which probably means it was built by the state.
Yeah.
No.
roofing.
It was built by
Lucan on
Durkins, I think, maybe, and some of the Durkin families like had some input into it as well too. There were big merchants at the time. There were 24 houses built in a row, all a terrace, and they were all the same size. You know, as I say, 4-room. You go in the door here, there was the kitchen and bedroom off it, and then 2 rooms alongside it here, and a small hallway out the back. And
Tiled
a
roof.
big long garden then.
yeah, there was a good garden.
There's always gardens, long gardens with those houses, because in the towns people had to grow their own vegetables.
Yes. Yes.
So that's why they had the big
Yeah.
And there
gardens.
was back at the back of it, there was a small shed, a toilet, like, and then there was an ash pit where the ashes was thrown out. And every year, some farmer would come in, and there was no back road as such, but he had access from a field. He'd come along, and he'd collect all the ashes out of the pits, and he'd bring it out as fertilizer on the land.
Oh, right.
You know, yeah.
And I think there was more than ashes in it.
Oh well, there was, yeah. I mean,
Compost.
That was the toilet.
that's right. The
Compost.
toilet was emptied into the ash pit.
peelings, probably potato peelings,
All that.
everything went into it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you see, well, in those days, of course, Granny kept hens, so there was no food wasted.
Yeah, the whole lot.
Do you know? And you see, the potatoes were boiled. And so they were mashed up. And I remember Granny would have this layers mash, and you'd be getting the thing. And then we, in our own house, my father had a little pigsty out the back, and he always kept 2 pigs. And so there, and we used to collect the waste from some of the houses.
Yeah.
People who wanted to get rid of stuff, and we'd feed the
To
pigs.
feed the pigs.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you know.
I heard a woman lately on the radio who have now, they're farmers in their 80s, and they've decided to become organic because the dairy was getting too much for them. And the interviewer asked her, and how is that now? And she said, sure, like, we're just gone back to doing what we used to do before.
That's right.
Yeah,
You know,
that's it, exactly.
it's the old
Yeah.
ways,
Yeah.
like, we're sustainable. So now we're doing that again. It's just a blip.
Yeah, but what I was going to say, the houses in... The common name for this house is New Line, but Granny and the old people hated the use of the word New Line.
Oh, did they?
It's Lower Chapel Street,
Lower
and it's actually, it is on the wall at the side of it, it is Lower Chapel Street, but it's commonly known as New Line, and the old people didn't like that. When it was built, it was called Lower Chapel Street, and I suppose people got to refer to it as a new line of houses there, and that name, you'll actually see the address now, New Line, but the old people didn't like it. That's not the original name.
Yeah.
But those houses now, when we left there in 1956, and then Granny died in 61, and I think the houses were making about 350 or 400 pounds. But good gardens. Since then now, a lot of the houses have been sold, and people just knock them, and they're building back into the gardens. And Mary told me there within the last couple of months, there's one of the houses advertised, if you're interested, Dave, in coming back to Castlebar, the asking price is 350,000.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah,
And
and I
a
mean,
poor widow with 3 children be going.
the frontage of the house, Emma, is only from that wall there to where the white curtain is hanging. You know, that's all. 350,000 is the asking price.
And another story now that pops into my head is because when Mammy was, 13, 14, whatever, and Granny was out at night, my mother got a hold of Dracula. And she read it when she had the chance and the house was quiet. And, I don't know about G, but she always begged me never to read Dracula because she frightened
The fear of
out
God.
of herself. Did she ever discuss it with G?
But then she
Dracula.
grew up in the time with tales and folklore and round the fire storytelling. So when she read that book, her mind was just playing tricks.
Oh yeah,
on her.
that's why the one about the white-head cow, there were stories like that. And people, I think, sometimes older people used to tell kids stories to try and keep them from going out.
Wraps, yeah.
Don't go down there because
Of
there's
course. There's fairies down there.
That's
Let's
right.
keep them out of it.
That's right.
Great treats.
Sure, you remember Tim. I remember sitting up on Tim's knee. Tim was the Garda who was married to my mother's sister who died young. And when he'd be up with us, as we said, which was often, and we're sitting up on his knee, and he'd tell you stories that had put the hair standing on the back of your head.
I remember one of
goblins and
he was an awful man. Yeah, he was a lovely man. I remember him coming in. We were out in Glen Island with him one day in the car, and when we were getting into the car, he said, "Gee, leaving Glen Island." I said, "I don't think we have hardly enough petrol to get home." And when he'd come to a hill, he'd knock off the engine. He said, "We'll save petrol. We'll run down this hill as far as we can." And sure, he probably was just slagging us But I remember him telling one story when he was in Rossport. Now, this has nothing to do with what we're talking about. Just a story. The Office of Public Works began to do up the barracks a bit, and they put in a stove, like a range, as we call it, years ago. And anyway, the first day, the housekeeper came out to them in the office and said, "Oh, this stove is no good at all. It's not working. It's smoking all over the place." So the boys went in, and she had put down the fire on the top of the stove.
Oh. She didn't know what it was. It's a great treat. Oh, bless her.
No, of course, when Uncle Tim, you wouldn't know whether to believe it or not. But he'd have those
he
kind
loved
of
big acting and
but he
messing.
was a real entertainer, and as I say.
And Faith brought your granny through her time. Maybe humour brought him through his.
Oh, you probably did. You probably did.
Yeah.
And of course, it was great for Granny to think that he was such a good man.
Her grandchildren would be looked after.
That's
And
right.
my mother thought the world of him.
Oh,
She
yeah.
thought the world of him.
Oh, yeah.
So that is compensation, obviously, when
Especially when she
something-
lost
Well, I mean,
her daughter.
you wouldn't get many guards as a chief would be saying, "Here's the car, go to car." And he always came up for Christmas, for Easter, and then for maybe longer in the summer holidays when the kids he'd organise his leave.
Holidays around it.
Yeah.
And you get a bit of time up here.
That's right,
and we'd all be chauffeured back to Canby or wherever.
That's right, Lecanby was
in
the go-to
yeah.
place. That's back the other side of Westport, you know,
Yeah.
seaside place.
So for Seaside Day in the car.
That's
But
right.
now another funny
Because
story.
we had no car ourselves, you
Yeah.
know.
Not so much funny, but it's Tony Deffley's story when we were talking about Glen Island and in and out. He told us, Tony is the first cousin of ours, so Uncle Jimmy's son, who'd be Granny's only son. And when their father died out in Glen Island, somebody, I mean, they walked into town most of the time, but somebody was sent to get Granny, to bring her out home for her father's funeral and wake, I suppose, first of all. And the discussion going back out was, how loud would they keen?
How?
How loud
Would they keen?
Would they keen?
Really?
Keening women.
So that's a link to the keening, like
Yes.
that I had never
Yeah.
realised, would have been happening.
Really?
Because you had to show respect, but you didn't want to be too shrill or
Gee,
too...
yeah, I never heard that.
Tony sure's full of
Really?
stories,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's lovely.
Isn't it amazing?
Yeah, that's really
to
lovely.
picture them.
Would she have done
discussing
any,
this.
because she was a nurse as well, would she have done anything with death as well, or was it purely midwifery?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question.
Would she have?
Done anything when people were dying? The neighbours or...
I don't remember that.
No, it was mostly
no.
midwifery.
Well, I'd say it was. Yeah, I'd say it was.
Unless it was her own. Yeah, she'd be
Yeah.
involved. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I don't. I presume, like when, as I say, when my aunt died in the house down there, Granny had been looking after her the whole time.
But that's the other thing we forgot to mention to Emma, that Aunt Nora, her sister, came to Castlebar for all the births of the babies. The 14.
Oh yeah, the 14.
Yeah, we really forgot to mention that.
That's
her
right.
sister's babies. So initially they lived in Castlebar. So she would have had, I don't know how many.
She would have had some of them.
First few
The
years.
first-
Yeah, they lived in Spencer Street.
And then
Yeah.
they went, were they in Mallow?
They went to, I know they were in Charleville.
Oh, Charleville.
And they were in Nina.
When she
to
came
my knowledge.
home, now how she managed, wouldn't you just wonder, physically, to have her others, whether Granny minded them, whether she brought all them, I've no idea. But she came to Castlebar to her
have
sister.
them all.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's one of the most important
trust
things about
is-
Granny. We nearly
the
forgot.
trust.
Yeah.
The trust.
Yeah.
But she probably
14.
would have come up a couple of weeks before.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was a regular visitor, and because I remember herself and Granny sitting down at the table, and Nora, which was unusual, used to smoke. Granny never smoked. It was most unusual, like, I know, wherever she learned this habit, But yes, she used to smoke. And Granny had a Singer sewing machine as well too, and I was able to bobbins.
Thread the bobbin.
Bobbins. I was able
thread
to
the
fill the
bobbins.
thing, and I was able to thread the machine, and I'd be fiddling with. But Granny would be there, and you'd see her, and sort of move it and
Making clothes and
yeah,
items for the house.
Well, and I'd say probably repairing a lot in those days.
Oh,
yeah.
Would she have had her own christening clothes and stuff? Do you remember? Because a lot of them seem to have had their own christening robes.
Yeah.
To help the mothers christen the babies when they be lying up.
Yeah.
And I don't know what happened, all that stuff now. She would have had, because in fact, on my other cousin's side, like on her father's side, Margot still has the christening
Yes, from their time.
robe from their time, like from her granny's time, like from way back,
I don't know whatever.
Yeah, I
became
don't
of
know that.
ours.
That's all right.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I'd say they probably passed. You see,
The
first of all,
pressed things on for sure.
they did.
Yeah, I'm just
see,
thinking
there
who would
there wasn't a lot of
testament?
storage space.
Yeah.
Do you know? And I suppose you see, maybe some of the stuff went to Aunt Nora, maybe some of the stuff went to other
It
friends
does,
or
and
relations.
it gets lost in transition
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
just sometimes family members have memories of a christening gown and some don't.
But there was
Yeah.
another story now to show how Granny was. When the David Terrace houses were allocated, and they had huge gardens, like, as we used to say, there'd be the grass of a cow, like, in the garden, And there was a story told by some of the relations that Granny was, first of all, allocated one of those, but there was some other family who had a big family who lost out. And Granny said, it's okay, we'll take the other house, the smaller house.
Really?
Yeah.
And that would be her. I
Yeah,
guess.
that would be her,
Yeah.
because she kind of felt the other big family coming into the small house wouldn't be fair.
Yeah.
You know, I suppose it was the council, if there was such
Were
allocated.
But she was just grateful for a house.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing.
Yeah.
And she was grateful, to be able to make a living, you know.
And
but
she
now
understood, you see, too, for the women's,
Yes.
what she'd be suffering
Yeah.
if she went into the small house with all these children.
Yeah.
So she would see firsthand
Yeah.
what would have went on there, you know.
Yeah.
So
How important it
how
should be
important it was
them.
for her.
And
Yeah.
Emma, this man here now, John Joe McGowan, he came who was the businessman who set up and probably looked after her like to a large extent. He obviously was a great man, like, and he lived to be 96.
Wow.
And in fact, his grandson was Father Joe Quinn, who was in Knock. You know, he was the parish priest in Knock there before Father Gibbons, now who's there at the moment, you know. And he was in Tuam as well too. But he was great, and I'd say he was a very solid sort of a citizen, like, and he'd be sitting down and he'd be advising a young fellow like me, like, and
He was an upstanding man in his community.
he was, he was, and he was, I'd say, he was probably a great advisor and a great help to her as well, too, you know. Yeah,
They were always
as you
so
said
friendly.
at the beginning, the father figure, like, you
Yeah,
know. But they used to make coffins, and I'll tell you one story. Now, it has nothing to do with what we're talking about. One of the guys who was in my class used to go Mitchin. Did you ever hear that?
Oh, I did.
expression?
There was plenty of lads did it in my day too.
But anyway, and I mean, the guards knew. So anyway, this young fella, Eugene by name, was Mitchin one day, and of course the guards used to come around to the school every so often, and the brothers told him, like, Eugene is in the Mitch, so the guard went round. But anyway, Eugene spotted him coming down at the back of McGowan's sheds, and Eugene went into the shed, and the guard spotted him, you see. The guard came along, but Eugene anyway went into a coffin and he left the lid down on himself. But of course the guard copped on. But the guard walked in. I knew the guard well. Shamey Lohan's father walked in, and he said, I'm tired with all this walking around. I'll light up my pipe and I'll sit down here in this coffin for a while and have a rest. Let me out! Let me out!
They couldn't stake it.
The poor little David. I thought he was being clever.
That became a famous story, in fact. Yeah. But sure. Look, there were great times, really. Do you know? I mean, we came up like in tough times. You know, I mean,
What great people.
there was no continental holidays.
But you never wanted Francie.
That's right. No.
And they didn't want any more
That's right.
than being fed
That's right.
and looked after and a bit of heat
And healthy.
and healthy. They were happy.
We were very healthy. Mammy breastfed all of us.
2 world wars, a civil war,
She surely
a
did.
pandemic. 2 world wars, a civil war, a pandemic, and several depressions. I never heard my parents or my grandmother whinging.
No.
You know,
You just pull yourself up and get on with it.
Oh, yeah.
They had such a positivity about them.
You know, you have a roof over your head and clothes on your back. You know, food
My
in
nan
your
left us that in her last letter.
Really?
Yeah. Just be grateful for what you have.
Yeah.
And don't be looking for something
Yeah.
that you can't have.
No,
Because you'll never be happy.
That's the secret of happiness.
Just be
isn't
grateful
it?
for what you have.
And then we had the
that's
pandemic,
lovely.
and they were on the radio.
Yeah.
We haven't had a continental holiday for 2 years.
I know.
You know,
But
and we
you
can't
see,
go
when
on the
you've
piss
come
at
through
Christmas.
that,
You know,
yeah.
Oh, I'm like,
I know.
how different.
They forget,
very
I
different.
suppose.
Yeah, and I think it's from being worldly too well off.
It is too well off.
As society.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
No,
hardship, really.
No hardship.
Or drive.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. You need a drive.
That's funny. I remember, like, our father died in 1986. But so prior to, he was driving up nearly to the end, but so in the early 80s anyway, he was driving somewhere one day anyway, and he got this young fella coming with a school bag, and he pulled up and gave him a lift, and I remember him saying to me, eventually said, the young fella said, I'm going to X place. Father said, okay, where will I drop you? He said, drop me here. And Dad said, is that where you live? Out the country. And the young fella said, no, he said, but I'm not going home yet, but if I go home, I'll get work to do. My father said, well, it's a pity I didn't know that and you'd be left walking. Yeah. No, that was unusual in those days because, I mean, you know,
Sure, teenagers, leave it to them.
people who go home, like, they'd have to do the bit of work and that, and you know.
Oh, God. I'll rustle up a bit of lunch now.
Yeah, we'll take this off here now. That's lovely.
Yeah.
We've over an hour.
Well, Emma, is that okay?
That is absolutely